Welcome, dearly beloved anointed ones. You can dodge earthly justice with a good lawyer, but who's going to represent you in heaven's court? Let that sink in. Because there comes a moment when the gavel doesn't slam in a courtroom, it echoes in the spirit realm, and once that judgment begins, not even Wi-Fi prayers can stop it. For years they tried everything to destroy you, lies, schemes, silent attacks. And when they couldn't kill your body, they tried to assassinate your spirit. They thought you were alone, defenseless, easy prey. But what they didn't realize was you were under surveillance by the Most High. Here's a chilling fact. Over 95% of high-level criminal networks collapse not because of whistleblowers, but because of their own arrogance. They talk too much, they get too confident, and eventually they hang themselves with their own ropes. That's exactly what's happening here. They dug your grave, now they're slipping into it. But hold on, we're not just talking earthly jail cells. This goes deeper. This is spiritual justice, divine intervention, the kind of reversal that leaves people speechless or begging for plea deals from both judges and Jesus. So buckle up, because what's coming isn't just karma. It's God reminding everyone why you don't mess with the anointed. And the way he's flipping the script, let's just say even Netflix couldn't write it better. Let's get into it. Number one, they tried to erase a soul that was divinely encoded with immortality. They tried to erase a soul that was divinely encoded with immortality. They thought if they pushed hard enough, lied long enough, and attacked consistently, they could delete you like a file from a hard drive. But what they were dealing with wasn't just flesh and blood. It was purpose wrapped in skin. They didn't understand that your existence wasn't man-made. You weren't created to be liked, approved, or even tolerated. You were assigned. And no matter how much they hated your presence was never up for their approval. They didn't give you your breath, and they sure couldn't take it away. They came with every weapon they could find: slander, manipulation, setups, false accusations, even spiritual attacks, thinking that if they couldn't break you physically, they'd wear you down mentally and spiritually. But every time you survived, they grew more terrified, because deep down, they knew this wasn't normal resilience. This wasn't just strength, it was divine insulation. It was favor that couldn't be cracked, even under pressure. And the more they pressed, the more undeniable your covering became. That's when it turned. The fear shifted. They weren't just trying to break you anymore, they were trying to silence what your survival revealed about them, because your endurance exposed their cruelty, your innocence exposed their guilt, and your peace in the middle of chaos made it impossible to keep pretending you were the problem. Their masks started slipping, their stories started unraveling. People began to notice the pattern. Why does this person keep thriving after everything thrown at them? It made them uncomfortable, and eventually it made them desperate. But here's the reality. When someone tries to erase what God has established, they don't succeed. They self-destruct. Every attempt to cancel you only became more evidence of your divine origin. Every plot turned into a paper trail of their corruption. They didn't stop you. They documented themselves. And now that judgment has caught up, they're realizing too late. They were never fighting you. They were fighting the one who sent you. And that kind of war doesn't end with warnings. It ends with justice. They couldn't take your life, but the one who gave it to you can take theirs in an instant. And no apology will undo the sentence. Number two, you were the test, and their response was spiritual treason. You were never just another face in the crowd. You were the test they didn't know they were taking. God placed you in their lives as a measuring stick, not to see how much they could love you, but to reveal how far they would go to destroy someone they couldn't control. Your presence exposed them. Your light irritated everything they were trying to keep hidden. And instead of seeing your presence as a blessing, they saw it as a threat. That's when the mask slipped. That's when the real character started to show. They didn't just fail the test, they violated it. They crossed lines they can't uncross. They touched what was sacred, thinking they were dealing with just another ordinary person. But they weren't messing with a regular human being. You were a divine setup, a mirror, a trigger, a wake-up call. And when they chose manipulation over honesty, betrayal over loyalty, harm over healing, they failed the very reason God allowed you in their space. They exposed themselves. That's the thing. You didn't have to do anything wrong. Just being you was enough. The test was whether they could honor what was holy in front of them, and they couldn't. They used you, mocked you, tried to destroy you, and then convinced themselves they were justified. That kind of self-deception is dangerous, because once someone starts believing that hurting you is okay, they go blind to the trap they're walking into. They think they're in control, but they've already been recorded, weighed, and found guilty. And now the judgment is unfolding, slowly, strategically, not out of revenge, but out of divine law. They touched something that wasn't theirs to harm. And heaven doesn't let that slide. You weren't just a target. You were evidence, proof of how people behave when no one's looking. You were sent to reveal what they didn't want to confront in themselves, and instead of transforming, they retaliated. That retaliation just sealed their fate. The test is over. They didn't just lose access to you. They activated consequences they can't run from. Because when you fail a divine test by trying to destroy the very person sent to help you evolve, you don't just lose blessings. You face judgment. And it's already begun. Number 3, they violated cosmic law trying to maintain carnal control. They weren't just jealous. They weren't just petty. What they did to you was deeper than envy. It was a spiritual violation disguised as personal conflict. They tried to maintain control over you using carnal methods, but what they were really fighting was something far beyond their understanding. They were attempting to bend divine order to serve their own agenda. That's why nothing they did ever truly worked, even when it looked like they had the upper hand for a while. They were violating universal law, and the debt for that kind of rebellion always comes due, with interest. They thought they were slick, manipulating situations behind the scenes, using emotional tactics, leveraging lies, and pulling strings in places you didn't even know existed. Some of them even dabbled in spiritual practices trying to stop your rise. But no matter what they threw at you, you kept standing. And every time you got back up, it exposed just how powerless their schemes really were. That's what drove them crazy. Not just your strength, but your immunity. You were protected in a way they couldn't explain, and that frustrated their control. They broke natural laws, trying to interrupt a supernatural calling. They tried to contain what they didn't create. And when people play God without divine authority, things start to break, starting with them. What they called strategy was actually self-destruction. They kept pushing because they couldn't stand the fact that someone like you, someone they thought was beneath them, was actually chosen. But spiritual elevation doesn't need their permission, and that's what they couldn't swallow. Now they're reaping what they've sown, not because you cursed them or wished bad on them, but because divine law doesn't sleep, it doesn't get bribed, it doesn't miss anything. The same force they challenged is now collecting the bill. Their attempts to control you only revealed how out of control they really were. And now everything they used to block your path is being used as evidence against them. You weren't fighting back, but heaven was. And heaven doesn't lose battles. It writes history. The laws they broke weren't yours to enforce, but they were God's to avenge, and that time is now. And that time is... Number 4. They thought if they couldn't kill you physically, they could assassinate your destiny. They were obsessed with your downfall, but they couldn't touch your body, so they went after your purpose. They thought if they couldn't end your life, they'd at least paralyze your future. They tried to destroy your reputation, attack your name, isolate you from your support, and drain you of hope. They whispered lies behind closed doors, played victim in public, and sowed seeds of confusion wherever your name came up. But they misunderstood something critical. Destiny doesn't die from slander, and purpose doesn't vanish because people are uncomfortable with your power. They weren't just trying to hurt you, they were trying to rob the world of what you were born to give. That's why their attacks were so relentless. They couldn't stand the thought of your voice being heard, your influence growing, or your light exposing their darkness. So they worked overtime to convince others you were the problem, that you were unstable, untrustworthy, unworthy. But every lie they told added more weight to their own downfall. What they didn't realize is that your destiny wasn't fragile. It was fortified. Every time they tried to assassinate it, they accidentally fertilized it. Every lie made you louder. Every betrayal made you bolder. Every setup became part of your setup. And while they were digging pit after pit, trying to bury your calling, they were actually building the blueprint for their own exposure. And now, those pits have turned into prison cells. The very energy they sent out to trap you is closing in on them. They tried to spiritually incarcerate you, isolate you, label you, sabotage your name. But all they did was create a trail of evidence that can't be ignored. What they meant to destroy you has become a mirror, and the world is finally seeing what's been hiding behind their masks. They thought they could erase your mission. Instead, they became the reason it's undeniable, because the level of attack you faced only confirms the magnitude of your calling. And now, the silence they tried to force on you is being broken by the sound of justice knocking on their door. Number 5, God let them run long enough to build their own gallows. God is never in a rush to destroy. He watches, he waits, not because he's slow to act, but because he is wise enough to give people room to reveal who they really are. He let them keep moving, keep talking, keep plotting, not because he couldn't stop them, but because he knew every step they took in pride was leading them straight into judgment. They thought their success in evil meant they were getting away with it. But what they were really doing was building their own gallows, one quiet act of arrogance at a time. He gave them space to change. That was mercy. He gave them moments where they could have stepped back, apologized, and turned around. But they didn't. They mistook his patience for approval. They confused his silence with permission. Instead of humbling themselves, they got bolder. Instead of repenting, they expanded their wickedness. And that is the danger. When someone's ego grows louder than their conscience, they think they are untouchable. But God does not forget. He simply collects. He allows people to go far enough until their own actions start speaking louder than any courtroom accusation. The rope they thought was theirs to control was actually the mercy they were supposed to use to climb back to truth. But in arrogance, they wrapped it around their own necks, not literally, but spiritually. They tied themselves to every lie, every betrayal, every wicked intention. And now that the truth is surfacing, that same rope has become the chain that exposes them. They set traps, made false reports, spread gossip, and manipulated situations thinking no one would ever know. But God was watching, and he let them keep going until the evidence built itself. They were too proud to stop, too blind to see they were digging their own hole. Now there's no one else to blame. They cannot talk their way out. They cannot twist the story anymore. The damage is documented. The devices they created to trap you are the same ones being used against them. Judgment is not delayed because God is absent. It is delayed because he gives every soul a fair chance. But when that chance is thrown away in arrogance, what comes next is not a warning. It is a sentence. And now that sentence has arrived. Number 6. You didn't need to fight. Your innocence screamed louder than any retaliation. You didn't have to clap back. You didn't have to prove anything. You didn't even have to defend yourself. Because the truth has a strange way of surviving, even when it's buried under lies. While they were busy trying to destroy your character, your innocence was working behind the scenes like a silent alarm. You didn't fight with your fists or your mouth. You fought by staying true to who you are. And that spoke louder than anything you could have said. They ran their mouths with confidence, not realizing that every false word was being recorded in the spirit. Every exaggeration, every rumor, every twisted story, all of it was being collected as evidence. God wasn't idle, he wasn't ignoring it. He was gathering it like legal documents, preparing a case they never saw coming. They thought your silence was submission. They thought you had nothing to say. But what they didn't understand is that you weren't silent because you were scared. You were silent because you were covered. And now it's all coming to light. People who once believed the lies are seeing the cracks in the story. The same mouths that were loud with gossip are now stuttering in shame. Some of the people who joined in on the smear campaign are now backing away, realizing they were used. The truth is too heavy to ignore now. Your calm in the storm has made people question the storm itself. Why hasn't this person broken down? Why hasn't this person retaliated? That's when the real story starts to unravel. The way you carried yourself has become a witness in your favor. The way you didn't respond in bitterness, didn't stoop to their level, didn't try to get revenge, it all proved who had real strength. And now people are looking at the situation with new eyes. They're seeing that it was never about you being wrong. It was about them needing someone to destroy because your light exposed their darkness. You didn't need revenge. You didn't need to prove anything. God was watching, collecting, and now revealing, and the same ones who tried to bury you in lies are the ones now drowning in the truth. Number 7, they underestimated the reach of divine surveillance. They really thought they were safe because no one was physically watching them. They assumed that secrecy meant immunity. As long as there were no cameras, no witnesses, and no immediate punishment, they believed they had nothing to worry about. But what they failed to realize is that divine surveillance sees what human eyes miss. The unseen realm doesn't need security footage. It doesn't need phone recordings. It doesn't miss a whisper, a thought, or a motive. While they were laughing in the dark, planning in secret and pretending in public, heaven was recording every single detail, every conversation they had behind closed doors, every message they deleted, every shady agreement they made, every time they smiled in your face and cursed you behind your back. It was all being documented by a force they thought didn't exist, or at least a force they thought would never respond. They thought their rituals were hidden. They thought their backroom deals would never be exposed. Some even mocked the spiritual realm, calling it superstition or paranoia. But now, that same unseen realm they dismissed is moving into the physical world, and it is bringing receipts. Things they thought were buried are resurfacing. People they trusted are flipping. Devices are being seized. Secrets are unraveling. And it is not a coincidence. It is divine consequence. You didn't have to catch them. God already did. You didn't have to dig for evidence. Heaven already compiled the file. They assumed that because you were quiet, you were clueless. But the truth is, you were protected by something they could not access or manipulate. They had no idea they were under spiritual surveillance the entire time. Now, the justice they thought they escaped is showing up in the most unexpected ways through legal systems, personal breakdowns, public exposure, and undeniable patterns of failure. They cannot keep hiding because the unseen realm is shining a light on everything they tried to keep in the dark. Their protection is gone. Their masks are slipping, and the consequences are here. They thought they could outsmart divine order. They thought they could move in shadows and avoid the light. But the light is not just coming. It has already arrived. And now there is nowhere left to hide. Number 8. They signed contracts in the dark thinking God was asleep. They thought they could outmaneuver God by doing their dirty work in the dark. They signed contracts, made unholy alliances, and entered secret agreements, thinking it would guarantee them control, not just over you, but over outcomes, influence, and spiritual territory they were never authorized to touch. They whispered vows over your name, invoked powers they didn't understand, and traded their integrity for what they believed was dominion. But they weren't buying power. They were purchasing judgment. Some of them went as far as joining secret societies, covens, or spiritual groups, masked in influence and prestige. They participated in rituals, offered sacrifices, and swore oaths, all to gain access to realms they thought would make them invincible. But they forgot one crucial truth. No deal made in darkness can cancel what God has written in light. They believed these hidden contracts would give them leverage over your destiny. What they didn't know is that the moment they signed those pacts, they weren't rewriting your story. They were sealing their own. They weren't just committing spiritual fraud, they were sentencing themselves to spiritual bankruptcy. They broke laws that govern creation itself. They tried to manipulate what only God can authorize. And for a while it looked like they were succeeding. Things may have gone their way temporarily. They may have looked powerful, protected, or even untouchable. But spiritual corruption has an expiration date. What's done in secret always spills into the physical realm, and now it is catching up to them. Strange things are happening, loss after loss, confusion, exposure, legal trouble, mental torment. The very spirits they once partnered with are now turning on them, because the devil doesn't do loyalty, he does loans, and everything he gives comes with a price. They thought they were making deals to elevate themselves, but all they did was set fire to their own foundations. You, on the other hand, didn't need to sign a thing. You were already chosen. You were already covered. And now the contrast is clear. They tried to gain power through darkness. You held your peace through the storm, and the difference between what was built by force and what was ordained by God is finally being exposed. Number 9. They mocked you for trusting God. Now they're begging him for mercy. They couldn't stand that you still believed. Through everything they put you through, the sabotage, the slander, the isolation, you still spoke God's name. You still prayed. You still trusted. And that drove them mad. They mocked your faith like it was a weakness. They called you naive, unstable, too spiritual, too hopeful, too trusting. They laughed behind your back and sometimes even to your face, acting like belief was something to be embarrassed about. But what they didn't realize was that your faith wasn't built on fantasy. It was forged in fire. They tried everything to make you give up on God. They attacked your peace, delayed your purpose, and celebrated every setback you faced. They wanted you to fall so they could point and say, "See, that praying didn't work." But you didn't break, you didn't fold. You held on when there was nothing left to hold but a whisper from God that said, "Keep going." And while they thought that was foolish, heaven was watching, and heaven was keeping score. Now, the same people who mocked your faith are going through things they can't even talk about publicly. They're scared. They're confused. Doors are closing. Peace is gone. Their money, their status, their alliances, none of it is working. And in the quiet corners of their minds, they're starting to realize something. You were never crazy. In fact, you were protected, covered, watched over by a power they didn't take seriously until now. They used to mock your prayers. Now they're whispering their own, asking God not to expose them, not to let the consequences hit too hard. But it's too late. Pride had its moment, and now humility is being forced on them, not through inspiration, but through pressure. The same God they said wasn't real is now very real in their situation. He's not ignoring their cries, but he's not rushing to deliver them either, because they didn't just hurt you, they tried to destroy your faith, the one thing that was keeping you afloat. Now they're learning what you already knew. God doesn't miss anything. He sees mockery. He hears every sarcastic comment. And when he chooses to move, he does it in a way that makes everyone silent. Now their pride is collapsing, and their only option is the same thing they once ridiculed, begging God for mercy. Number 10, they launched witchcraft but forgot God owns the battlefield. They were so desperate to stop you that they didn't care what they had to do to get results. So they turned to spiritual warfare, not in righteousness but in rebellion. They launched witchcraft thinking it would give them the power to block your blessings, delay your progress, and torment your mind. They consulted dark forces, visited false prophets, paid spiritual workers, and activated altars in secret, believing that with enough effort, they could override your protection. But they made one fatal mistake. They didn't ask who owned the battlefield. They treated the spiritual realm like a playground, something to be used and manipulated for personal gain. They didn't understand that the moment they touched a soul covered by a divine contract, they stepped into territory they had no authority to access. You were not just another target. You were sealed. You were sent. You were marked by heaven before you were even born. That means no matter how many curses they spoke, how many rituals they performed, or how many spells they paid for, nothing could override what God had already written. The problem with using darkness to fight light is that darkness can never win. It may look powerful for a moment. It may cause some confusion or temporary discomfort, but it always turns on its user. And now, that is exactly what is happening. The spirits they called on are backfiring, the altars they raised are collapsing. The very energy they sent out is now circling back like a spiritual boomerang with vengeance in its hands. God allowed it for a season, not because he was powerless, but because he wanted the full extent of their rebellion to be revealed. He wanted their wickedness to be undeniable. And now judgment has arrived, not quietly, but with force. Their dreams are disturbed, their health is failing, their alliances are breaking, their finances are crumbling. Everything they tried to build off stolen power is falling apart. Because the truth is, they were never in control. This was never their war to win. And now that God has stepped onto the battlefield, their weapons are useless. The battle belongs to the Lord, and he has declared victory on your behalf. Every altar raised against you is being shattered. Every spirit they summoned is being silenced. And every plan they made is now their own downfall. Number 11, the same hands that tried to dig your grave are now in handcuffs. They went out of their way to destroy you. They lied, schemed, and manipulated with precision, thinking they would finally get rid of you for good. They used their hands to dig deep, not into the ground, but into your life. They tried to bury your voice, your influence, your destiny. They created stories, planted false evidence, turned people against you, and all the while believed they were winning. They believed you would break under the pressure, that you would fold, disappear, or crumble into silence. But what they did not know was that you were not just built to survive. You were born with eternal purpose. You weren't just any person. You were chosen to free others, to speak truth, to carry light. So when they tried to silence you, they weren't just attacking an individual. They were trying to put divine purpose in a coffin. They underestimated how sacred your mission really was. And now the very hands that tried to dig your grave are being cuffed, restrained, and judged by the same systems they once thought they could manipulate. It is not just justice. It is divine irony. The setup they designed for you has become their downfall. The lies they created are now being used against them. The traps they set have turned into evidence. Their fingerprints are all over their own destruction. They thought they were operating in power, but all they did was walk themselves into exposure. What's happening now is more than legal. It's spiritual justice playing out in real time. God is using the earthly justice system as an instrument to show the world that when he says, "No weapon formed against you shall prosper," he means it. And sometimes the consequences don't show up in the next life. They show up right here, in handcuffs, courtrooms, and exposed reputations. They thought you were the one being judged, but the whole time they were the ones on trial. They didn't even know they were being watched, documented, and set up by their own pride. Now they are sitting in the same pit they dug for you, and all they can do is sit there in disbelief while the world watches the poetic justice unfold. Number 12. Their attack became your promotion, and their judgment became your vindication. They had one goal: to stop you. They wanted to block your progress, delay your blessings, steal your opportunities, and ruin your name. They operated out of pure spite, not realizing that every act of malice was secretly pushing you into a greater level of favor. What they thought was a setback was actually a setup. Every door they tried to shut only led you to a better one. Every plan they made to break you became fuel for your next breakthrough. Their attacks didn't destroy you, they promoted you. Every time they tried to sabotage you, God elevated you. Every trap they set forced you to grow stronger, wiser, more spiritually alert. What they meant for harm became part of your preparation. God didn't just protect you from their schemes. He used those very schemes to increase your rank in the Spirit. While they were busy tearing you down, heaven was busy building you up. And now the results are undeniable. You're standing in places they never thought you'd reach. You're walking in authority they tried to strip from you. You've been multiplied in the very areas they tried to drain. They tried to subtract from your life, but God added double. They tried to erase your influence, but now you are shining brighter than ever. Not because you fought back, but because you stayed in alignment while they lost theirs. But the other side of this is not so pretty for them. The same schemes they used are now exposing them. Every act of jealousy, manipulation, and sabotage is unraveling. Their behavior, once hidden behind charm and lies, is now front and center. People are seeing their true character without you ever saying a word. The mask is off, the truth is loud, and their judgment has arrived. While you were being promoted in silence, their own actions were dragging them into exposure. Your vindication isn't based on revenge, it's based on the undeniable contrast. They tried to steal your harvest, and now they're left with famine. You stayed rooted, you stayed faithful, and now the evidence is speaking for itself. Your elevation is their undoing, and your rise is proof that no weapon formed against you ever stood a chance. Number 13. You weren't just a target, you were divine evidence in human form. They didn't just target you out of hate. They targeted you because your presence revealed something uncomfortable about them. You weren't just another person moving through life. You were divine evidence walking in human form. God didn't just allow you to be there by chance. He placed you like a light in a dark room, knowing that your very existence would expose what others tried to keep hidden. You were never the problem. You were the proof. That is why the attacks were so brutal. That is why the slander was so calculated. That is why they watched your every move, tried to twist your words, and did everything in their power to discredit you. Because deep down, they knew you saw through them. You carried a level of discernment and purity that made their manipulation ineffective. Your life exposed the double lives they were living. You didn't have to accuse them. Your integrity was the accusation. You didn't have to uncover anything. Your consistency made the truth impossible to bury. God let you go through the fire, not to destroy you, but to draw out what needed to be seen. You became the mirror that corruption couldn't ignore. You were the test they failed, the invitation to change they rejected, and because they didn't just reject you, but the one who sent you, the consequences were unavoidable. Your survival is not just a personal victory, it is a public indictment. You walking out of every trap they set, still standing, still clear, still blessed, that is what's breaking the spell. That is what is making people ask questions. That is what's pulling back the curtain on the ones who thought they were above judgment. Your survival is loud. Not because you're shouting, but because it makes their lies impossible to maintain. Some of these people thought they were too connected, too protected, too powerful to ever face judgment. But now, because you stayed true, because you endured, because you never stooped to their level, the truth is pouring out. They can't escape what they tried to cover. And the reason, you were the vessel God used to make it undeniable. You weren't just a target, you were a divine tool. And now justice is unfolding, and your survival is the reason it cannot be stopped. Number 14, their punishment isn't just karma, it's a prophetic correction. What's happening to them isn't some cosmic coincidence. It's not just what goes around comes around. This is deeper than karma. This is prophetic correction. God doesn't let people mock him forever. He doesn't sit back while his chosen ones are trampled on without putting something in motion. What they're experiencing now isn't random. It's the result of divine timing. A judgment that has been building, waiting for the perfect moment to drop. For years they thought they were getting away with it. They took your silence as weakness. They misinterpreted grace as absence. But the truth is, God was giving them time, not to win, but to change. And when they chose to dig deeper into wickedness, he began to prepare the consequences. This isn't payback. It's prophecy. It's correction. It's heaven saying, enough is enough. When God corrects, he doesn't just deal with behavior. He cleanses entire atmospheres. He removes threats, disrupts systems, exposes patterns, and shuts down demonic altars. And what people don't realize is that sometimes when they touch a chosen one, they're not just messing with a person. They're interfering with divine infrastructure. You were never just a victim. You were part of God's plan. And that means what they did to you was recorded in heaven. Not for pity, but for righteous judgment. Now the world is watching the flip. The ones who tried to bury you are being buried by their own actions. The ones who mocked your trust in God are now looking for mercy they never gave. The same mouths that lied are now too afraid to speak, and it's all happening because God is sending a message that he defends his own in a way no courtroom, no lawyer, no revenge plot ever could. You didn't need to lift a finger. You didn't need to strike back. All you had to do was stay faithful. And now justice is speaking. Not in whispers, but in headlines. Not in rumors, but in full exposure. God is making it clear. His chosen don't need to fight for revenge because he's already written the ending, and when he judges, it is final. It is perfect, and it is a warning. Touch not his anointed. Everything they did in the dark is being dragged into the light. Not by force, but by divine authority. The very ones who thought they were untouchable are now trapped in the very web they spun for you. This isn't a coincidence, and it's not just poetic justice, it's prophecy unfolding. It's the hand of God making an open example out of hidden wickedness. You didn't have to prove your innocence because heaven already validated your heart. You didn't have to clap back because God was already building a case that no lie could survive. And now the same people who tried to erase you are being publicly corrected, not by your power, but by God's unmatched justice. The gallows they built were never for you. The spiritual traps, the false accusations, the envy, the witchcraft, the smear campaigns, all of it has turned into receipts for their downfall. And you? You're rising, you're glowing, you're walking proof that no weapon formed will prosper when God's hand is on your life. This is more than closure. This is God restoring order. This is a public declaration that he sees all, he hears all, and he defends his own, not with petty retaliation, but with prophetic precision. They tried to take your life, but God is reclaiming his glory through yours. Their fall is not just punishment, it's a loud divine announcement that righteousness still reigns. If this message lit a fire in your spirit or confirmed what you've been feeling deep down, don't just scroll away. subscribe to the channel right now. This space is a sanctuary for truth, healing, and divine clarity. Like this video so it reaches others who need this confirmation. Comment below and let us know how this spoke to you. Your testimony could be someone else's breakthrough. And don't keep this to yourself. Share it with a friend, a loved one, or someone who's been silently enduring spiritual warfare. Let them know they're not crazy, they're not alone, and God is moving. You're not just watching a video, you're stepping into a revelation. Stay connected, stay aligned, and remember, heaven has receipts. God bless you.